Have you ever felt invisible in the story of your own life? For a 73-year-old mother, that moment had arrived. She sat at an elegant dinner table. Across from the son she had spent her entire life loving, but his eyes avoided hers, leaving her alone to face the ice-cold contempt of her daughter-in-law. Then, the words were spoken, a cruel declaration that she was not family. The elderly mother's heart shattered, but just as she was sinking into despair, a child's voice suddenly rang out, changing everything. What will a mother do when her only son chooses silence in the face of her pain? The echo in the silence. My name is Rosemary Hawthorne, and I am 73 years old. There comes a point in your life when you believe you've seen it all. You've weathered the storms, buried a husband, and poured your soul into raising a son. You think you're standing on solid ground. Then, one evening, at a dinner table that feels both familiar and foreign, the ground gives way beneath you. It began with the silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that had been building for 2 days. We were at the Heron's Rest, a place that holds more of my history than any photo album. My son, Jonathan, sat across from me. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just pushed a piece of grilled fish around his plate with his fork. His wife, Lauren, sat beside him, a statue of perfect composure. Her posture was straight, her makeup flawless. Only the tight set of her jaw betrayed the tension coiling within her. The whole meal had been like this. Short, clipped answers, polite, empty questions, a performance for the sake of the children. Lucas and Grace. I think she was waiting for the right moment to let the poison out. She had been watching me all evening. Her eyes sharp and critical. She watched how I held my fork, how I sipped my water. It was a look that judged every part of me and found it wanting. Finally, she lifted her wine glass. The deep red of the liquid matched her fingernails. She took a slow, deliberate sip, then she looked straight at me, her voice low, but sharp enough to cut through the pretense. You know, Rosemary, she began, the sound of my own name feeling like an accusation. You can sit at this table, but you're not family. You're just an obligation. An obligation. The word was a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples of it spread across the table, across the 73 years of my life, and shattered everything. I felt the air leave my lungs. I looked at my son, my boy, pleading with my eyes for him to say something, anything. He didn't. He put his fork down. That was his only movement. In his silence, I heard his agreement, and just when the silence became unbearable, a small, clear voice piped up from beside me. It was my granddaughter, my little Grace. But Grandma Rose is my queen, she whispered, her face filled with a child's confusion. She didn't understand the cruelty. She only understood the love. Her voice, that innocent child's voice, was the one thing that changed the texture of the moment. It didn't fix it. No. It simply highlighted the ugliness of what had just happened. It was the sound of truth in a room full of lies, and it sent my mind reeling backward, back to the beginning of the lie, back to 2 days ago. In the car, the drive to the South Carolina coast was long. I sat in the back, a silent passenger in my own family's story. Jonathan drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were pale. His phone, resting in the console, lit up every few minutes with a new message. Each time, I saw a muscle jump in his jaw. A storm was brewing inside him. I could feel it, but the windows were rolled up, and I was on the outside. Lauren sat beside him. Scrolling through her phone, she let out a series of small, impatient sighs. The hotel was too far. The traffic was a nightmare. Then, her eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. It was a quick, dismissive glance, a glance that took in my simple cotton dress, my hair tied back, and filed me away under a category I didn't yet have a name for. I hope you're comfortable back there, Rosemary, she said, her voice a careful blend of politeness and condescension. Jonathan insisted on this resort. It's a bit old-fashioned for my taste. Old-fashioned, the word was meant to be a small cut, a subtle reminder of my irrelevance. I turned to look out the window, at the ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. I thought of my husband, Samuel. I thought of the day we stood on this very land, empty then, with nothing but the sound of the ocean and the beat of our own hearts. I remembered his hand in mine. Rose, he had said, his voice thick with dreams. This isn't just land, it's legacy. We're not building walls. We're building roots. Roots. A bitter laugh almost escaped me. I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to fish in these marshes, the boy whose scraped knees I had bandaged, now a stranger who couldn't meet my eyes. When we finally arrived at the Heron's Rest, my home, I felt like a visitor, a young man, the grandson of my first and most loyal manager, rushed to open my door, his face breaking into a wide, honest smile of recognition. I had to stop him, a small shake of my head. That's all it took. The light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a polite, professional mask. Lauren emerged from the car, handing her keys to the valet as if he were invisible. She surveyed the main lodge, the building Samuel and I had designed on our kitchen table. Well, she announced to no one in particular, it's certainly rustic. In the lobby, Mr. Carter, a man who had shared coffee with me for 30 years, greeted us. He looked at me, his eyes full of warmth and respect, but Lauren spoke over him. Reservation for Hawthorne, she said, her voice sharp. A suite for William Jonathan Hawthorne, and a standard room for his mother. She separated me from them with her words. She drew a line. This side is family. That side is something else. An obligation. That was the word for it. The child's voice at the dinner table didn't reveal a new truth. It just confirmed an old one I had refused to see. The Queen's Castle of Sand. The next morning, the sun rose over the marsh, painting the sky in shades of soft pink and orange. It was a beautiful sight, but I watched it alone from the small balcony of my standard room. Down the hall, in their grand suite, my family was beginning their day. Around 9 o'clock, Jonathan knocked on my door. He stood in the hallway, already dressed in a collared shirt and linen trousers. He wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Mom, he started, his voice a little too cheerful. Lauren and I have an urgent conference call we have to take. It's about a new investment. It could go on for a couple of hours. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Would you mind watching Grace and Lucas just for the morning? I knew it wasn't a real question. It was a statement of fact. My role for the day had been decided. I am the babysitter, of course. Son, I said, forcing a smile. I'd love to. He looked relieved. Great. Thanks. Mom, you're a lifesaver. He turned to leave, then paused. They've already had breakfast. Just keep them out of trouble. A few minutes later, my grandchildren arrived. 10-year-old Lucas walked in first, his eyes already glued to a bright screen in his hands. 8-year-old Grace followed, carrying a similar device. They looked like tiny, serious business people, their faces illuminated by a pale, artificial light. They sat on the 2 chairs in my room, their shoulders hunched, thumbs moving silently and rapidly over the screens. The only sound was the faint, tinny music coming from their games. I sat on the edge of my bed, watching them. 2 beautiful children, right here in front of me, but a million miles away. It's a beautiful day. I offered, maybe we could walk down to the beach. Lucas didn't look up. Mom says the sun is bad for your skin. Grace parroted him, her voice small. And we can't get our clothes dirty. I looked at their pristine outfits. A crisp, white dress for Grace, khaki shorts and a polo shirt for Lucas. They looked like they were dressed for a country club, not a day of discovery by the sea. I saw Lauren's rules, Lauren's anxieties, wrapped around them like a second skin. I didn't argue. An old woman learns when to push and when to wait. All right, I said gently. How about we just go sit on the porch, swing by the dunes? We can feel the breeze. To my surprise, they agreed. We walked down to the wide, a shaded porch that overlooked the beach path. They took their tablets with them. Of course, we sat on a large wooden swing, moving gently back and forth. The salty air smelled clean. The sound of the waves was a soft, rhythmic hush, but my grandchildren heard none of it. They were still lost in their digital worlds. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Loneliness? It's a strange thing. To be surrounded by family and feel utterly alone. So, I did what I've always done when words fail me. I started to do something with my hands. I left them on the swing and walked down the short path to the edge of the beach. The sand was warm and soft under my feet. I found a spot where the tide had left a nice patch of damp, firm sand. I sat down, not caring if I got my simple skirt sandy. I began to dig. I started with a small mound, then I began to shape it. I packed the sand, smoothing the sides. I used my fingers to carve out a small doorway. Then a window. I wasn't building just any sand castle. I was building a memory, a smaller version of the first cottage Samuel and I ever built on this property. The one with the wide porch and the crooked shutters. I worked in silence. The sun was warm on my back. I found a beautiful, spiraled whelk shell and placed it at the very top, like a tower. I used smaller, pearly shells to make a pathway to the door. I found a piece of sea-worn driftwood and stuck it in the sand like a flagpole. I was so lost in my work. I didn't notice them at first. Lucas was standing a few feet away, his tablet hanging forgotten at his side. He was watching my hands. Grace was closer, crouched down, her eyes wide with wonder. "What is that?" she whispered. "It's a castle," I said softly, not looking up from my work. "A castle for the sea turtle king." Lucas took a hesitant step closer. "Sea turtles don't have kings." "Oh, they do," I said, a smile finally reaching my lips. "But he only comes out at high tide. He needs a strong castle to keep his treasure safe from the ghost crabs." This, apparently, was a detail they hadn't learned on their tablets. Grace sat down next to me, her white dress immediately getting sandy. "What treasure?" "Ah," I said, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Pearls. Pearls the size of seagull eggs." That did it. The screens were forgotten. Lucas sat down on my other side. For the next hour, we didn't just build, we created a world. Lucas, my serious, logical grandson, became the chief engineer, designing moats and defenses. Grace, my little dreamer, was the royal decorator. She found feathers and smooth, green sea glass to adorn the walls. We worked together, our hands and knees covered in sand. We talked. We laughed. I told them stories about finding sharks' teeth on this very beach when their daddy was just a boy. I saw a light in their eyes that no screen could ever produce. The genuine, bright light of curiosity and joy. Finally, we were done. We sat back and admired our creation. It was a magnificent thing, lopsided and imperfect. But it was ours. Grace leaned against my shoulder, her small body warm against mine. She looked at the sand castle, then up at me, her eyes shining. "Wow." "Grandma Rose," she said, her voice filled with awe. "You're the queen of this castle." A queen. In that moment, surrounded by the ruins of my own family, a child had given me a crown. I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a feeling I hadn't realized I had been missing so desperately. It was hope, a small, fragile thing, perhaps as fragile as a castle made of sand, but for the first time on that trip, I wasn't an obligation. I was a queen. Whispers in the garden. The feeling of hope stayed with me for the rest of the afternoon. We washed the sand from our hands and knees. I took the children for ice cream at the little parlor by the pool. For the first time, they left their tablets in the room. They talked. They asked questions. Lucas wanted to know if ghost crabs really steal treasure. Grace wanted to know if I could teach her how to find the perfect shells. I watched them, really watched them, and saw a glimpse of the children they were meant to be. Curious, bright, happy. It felt like a small victory. A victory for an old woman who only wanted her grandchildren to know the simple joy of sun on their skin and sand between their toes. Later that evening, Jonathan and Lauren returned. Lauren looked at Grace's dress, now bearing a faint sandy watermark, and her lips thinned, but she said nothing. Jonathan managed a tired smile. They were taking the children out for pizza. They asked if I wanted to come. I shook my head. "No? You all go on." I told them, "I'm a little tired. I think I'll just have a quiet evening in my room." The truth was, I wanted to hold on to the warmth of the afternoon a little longer. I didn't want it to be spoiled by polite, empty conversation. After they left, I decided to take a short walk. The evening air was soft and fragrant with the smell of jasmine and salt. The resort pathways are lined with old live oaks and lush gardens. Places I designed myself to feel like secret sanctuaries. I walked along a quiet, winding path that led past a small, secluded garden with a stone bench. It was a place I used to go with Samuel to watch the sunset. As I neared the garden, I heard voices, low and tense. I stopped. I recognized them immediately. Jonathan and Lauren. My first thought was that they had come back early. My second thought was that I should turn around, give them their privacy. But there was a sharp, angry edge to Lauren's voice that held me frozen. I found myself stepping quietly off the path, into the shadow of a large magnolia tree. I don't know why I did it. Maybe some instinct, some deep part of me, knew I needed to hear. You didn't even try, did you? Lauren's voice was a furious whisper. You didn't even bring it up. There was a heavy sigh. Jonathan's voice. It was weary, so weary. Lauren, it wasn't the right time. We were with the kids, with my mother. The right time, she hissed. The bank called me again this afternoon. Jonathan, the right time was yesterday. The final notice comes on Friday. We are going to lose everything. My breath caught in my throat. Lose everything. What were they talking about? I know, Jonathan said, his voice cracking. God, you don't think I know that? Then ask her. Lauren's voice rose, sharp with desperation. Just ask her for the house. It's just an old house in a quiet neighborhood. She doesn't need it. We do. The house. My house. The small brick home Samuel and I bought 50 years ago. The house where I raised my son. The house where every wall holds a memory. Every floorboard creaks with a story. My home? Jonathan's reply was so quiet I had to strain to hear it. Lauren. That house is all she has left. It's her security. Her whole life is in there. How can I ask her to sign that away? His words were a small comfort, a flicker of the sun I once knew. But then Lauren spoke again, and that small flicker was extinguished. Her voice dropped, becoming cold and calculating. It was the most terrible sound I had ever heard. Then you make her feel like it's her duty. Silence. I held my breath, praying my son would say no, praying he would stand up to her. He didn't. She continued, her voice like ice. You make her feel like it's her responsibility as a mother, as a grandmother. You tell her it's for Grace's future, for Lucas's education. You make her feel guilty. She's from a different generation. Jonathan, family is everything to them. She'll do it. She'll soften up. I leaned my hand against the rough bark of the magnolia tree to keep myself from falling. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My ears were ringing. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just a desperate plea for help. It was a plan, a cold, cruel plan to manipulate my love, to weaponize my own heart against me. The whole trip, the polite smiles, the forced conversation, it was all a stage, and I was the unsuspecting actor. Being led to the part where I sign away my entire life, I stood there in the shadows, long after their footsteps had faded. The beautiful jasmine scent now seemed sickeningly sweet. The gentle breeze felt like a cold slap against my skin, the hope I had felt just hours before. That small, fragile castle of sand, the tide had come in, and it had been washed away completely. When you hear those words, words spoken by your own child, meant for your ears but not for your heart, something inside of you breaks. It breaks so completely that you know it can never be put back together in the same way. But something else begins to awaken in the ruins. I wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do, please? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes, sharing a burden is the only way to see the path forward. The dinner party. We are back at the dinner table, the present moment. After hearing those whispers in the garden, everything looks different. The soft glow of the lamps seems harsh. The beautiful, quiet restaurant feels like a stage. And I am no longer just a mother having dinner with her family. I am an audience member. Watching a play I finally understand. I see everything now. I see the way Lauren's smile doesn't reach her eyes. It's a tight, practice thing she puts on for the waiter. I see the way Jonathan shreds his linen napkin in his lap. A quiet act of destruction. He has done this since he was a boy. Whenever he was nervous or hiding something. Some things, it seems, never change. They think I don't know. They think I am the same simple woman who sat in the back of their car 2 days ago. They don't know that I am now watching them through the lens of their betrayal. My silence is no longer the silence of patience. It is the silence of observation, the silence of waiting. The waiter comes to take our order. He's a young man from the village. I've known his family for years. He recommends the pan-seared grouper. Fresh off the boat this afternoon. It sounds wonderful, but I find myself ordering the shrimp and grits. A simple, comforting dish. A taste of the past. Lauren watches me. A small, condescending smile plays on her lips. Shrimp and grits, she says, as if the words themselves taste funny in her mouth. You always did have such simple tastes. Rosemary. Her words are meant to put me in my place. The simple mother. The woman of simple tastes. Uncomplicated. Easy to manage. I just nod. A small, polite movement. I don't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I am learning. I turn my attention to my granddaughter. To Grace. She is the only honest thing at this table. She is drawing on her paper placemat with a crayon. A castle. A big, beautiful sand castle with a flag on top. That looks just like our castle from this afternoon. Sweetie, I say, my voice softer than I intended. For a moment, I forget the play. I am just a grandmother, talking to her grandchild. Remember the beautiful shell we found for the front door? Grace's face lights up. Yes, and the seaweed for the... Grace, don't talk about sandy things at the dinner table. Lauren cuts in. Her voice sharp. She doesn't even look at her daughter. She is looking at me. Her message is clear. You are not allowed to connect with her. You are not allowed to have something that is just yours and hers. Grace's smile vanishes. She puts her crayon down. The light has gone out. The food arrives. We eat in near silence. The only sounds are the scraping of forks on plates and the distant murmur of other diners. The shrimp and grits taste like ash in my mouth. Jonathan eats quickly, mechanically, his eyes fixed on a spot on the tablecloth. He is a man running from a conversation. Finally, he clears his throat. He puts his fork and knife down, perfectly aligned on his plate. A signal. The performance is about to begin. Mom. He starts, and the sound of that word feels so false, so rehearsed. Stephanie and I, we've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About the future, about family. He says the word family and glances at Lauren. She gives him a small, almost imperceptible nod. The kind of director gives an actor who has remembered his line. I wait. I say nothing. I just look at my son, at the stranger wearing his face. I watch him struggle, the lie heavy on his tongue. He is about to ask me for my home. He is about to ask me to sacrifice the last piece of my life with Samuel for a business built on failure and a life built on appearances. But he can't do it. The words won't come. He falters, looking down at his hands. And Lauren, seeing his weakness, loses her patience. The mask of civility cracks and falls away. She has no time for this slow, painful extraction. She will take a hammer to the truth. She places her wine glass down on the table. The click is loud in the tense silence. She turns her body towards me. A predator turning on its prey. What your son is trying to say. She begins, her voice low and venomous, is that we're tired. She pauses, letting the word hang in the air. I can feel the children tense beside me. We're tired of pretending. Her eyes, cold and hard as river stones, lock onto mine. And then she delivers the final, fatal blow. You know, Rosemary, you can sit at this table, but you're not family. You're just an obligation. The words land. There is no sound, no gasp. The world just stops. The waiters continue to move around us. The other families continue to laugh and talk. But at our table, time has frozen. My son is a statue. My grandchildren are holding their breath. And I am just a woman of 73, listening to the sound of my own heart breaking. The child's voice and the raging storm. The silence after Lauren spoke was a living thing. It pressed in on us, heavy and cold. My son, Jonathan, kept his eyes fixed on his plate. His refusal to look at me was a blade twisting in my heart. I felt my 73 years settle on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. I was tired. So tired of fighting a battle I didn't even know I was in. And then, a small voice cut through the stillness. That's not true. Mommy. It was Grace. Her lower lip was trembling, her eyes wide and shimmering with tears. She pushed her chair back a little. Her small hands clenched into fists on the white tablecloth. Grandma is family, she declared, her voice rising with a child's pure, unwavering sense of justice. She's my queen. My queen. The words from the afternoon. From our kingdom of sand. Now offered as a shield. For a single, breathtaking moment. I felt a surge of love so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. A child's love. Honest and fierce. But the emotion was too much for her small body. Her fierce declaration turned into a gasp. Then a cough. A tight, dry, desperate sound. Her face, which had been flushed with indignation, began to pale. Her eyes grew wide with a different emotion now. Fear. She clawed at her own throat, her small chest heaving. The coughs came faster, one after another, each one sounding more constricted than the last. She was struggling for air. Chaos erupted. Grace, oh my God. Grace, Lauren shrieked. Jumping up from her chair, she hovered over our granddaughter, her hands fluttering uselessly, her face a mask of panic. What's happening? Somebody do something. Jonathan was frozen. He stood halfway out of his chair, his face as white as the napkin crumpled in his hand. He looked like a man watching his worst nightmare unfold. Paralyzed and utterly helpless. The restaurant staff started to turn and stare. A low murmur of alarm spread through the room. In that storm of panic, a strange calm washed over me. I have lived a long time. I have seen sickness. I have faced loss. Fear is a luxury you learn to set aside when someone you love is in danger. I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. I moved around the table to Grace. Jonathan, I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise. It was the voice of a mother, a leader. Her inhaler. It's in her little pink bag. Now, the command seemed to break his paralysis. He fumbled for the small unicorn backpack hanging on the back of Grace's chair. His hands shaking, I turned to the maitre d', who was rushing toward our table. It was Mr. Carter. I didn't see him as my employee. I saw him as a capable man I could trust. Mr. Carter, I said, my voice steady. Call the resort's on-site medic. Tell them it's an acute asthma attack. A child, 8 years old. We are at table 12 in the Pearl. He nodded, his own face calm and professional, and immediately turned to speak into his radio. I knelt beside my granddaughter. I took her small, cold hands in mine. Look at me. Grace, I said softly, making her look away from her mother's frantic face. Look at Grandma Rose. We're going to breathe together, slow and steady. In and out. That's it. You're all right. I'm right here. Jonathan finally unzipped the bag and thrust the small, blue inhaler into my hand. I administered the medicine, my movements practiced, and sure, just as the nurse had taught me years ago when Grace was first diagnosed. I held her close, murmuring to her, shielding her from the chaos my own family had created. I could feel her small body begin to relax against mine. Her frantic gasps slowly eased into shaky, but deeper, breaths. It was in that moment, as the immediate crisis began to pass, that I heard a sound behind me. A choked sob. I looked over my shoulder. Jonathan was on his knees, not just kneeling, but crumpled on the floor beside me. His head bowed, his shoulders were shaking. Tears streamed down his face, dripping onto the fine wool rug. The successful businessman, the confident son, was gone. In his place was a broken man. Mom, he whispered, his voice thick with shame. Mom, I'm so sorry. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a pain so profound it seemed to tear him apart. My company, it's gone. He choked out, the confession tumbling out in a torrent of misery. Everything is gone. I was going to ask you. He shook his head, unable to finish the sentence. Oh, God, What was I going to do? What have I become? He wasn't speaking to Lauren. He wasn't speaking to anyone else. He was speaking to me. And in the middle of that fancy restaurant, with strangers watching, my son finally told the truth. Not because he was caught in a lie, but because he had seen his own failure, his own weakness, reflected in the frightened eyes of his daughter. The Queen's Castle of Stone. The resort medic was a kind, efficient woman. She checked Grace's breathing, which was steady now, and suggested taking her back to the suite to rest. Lauren, pale and silent, followed them out of the restaurant. Her high heels clicked softly on the polished floor, a sound that seemed unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. Lucas trailed behind her, his small face etched with a worry far too old for his years. And then, there were just two of us left at the table, me and my son. Jonathan was still on the floor. He hadn't moved. He seemed smaller somehow, stripped of the tailored suit and confident smile he usually wore. He was just a man on his knees, surrounded by the wreckage of his own choices. The other diners had gone back to their meals, trying their best to pretend they hadn't seen a family fall apart between the appetizer and the main course. I sat back down in my chair. I looked at the son I had raised, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, to skip stones across the water, to be an honest man. I felt a deep, profound sadness, but the weakness, the desire to rush to him and comfort him, was gone. That part of me had died in the garden. Listening to the whispers, I waited. The silence stretched. Finally, he looked up at me, his face blotchy, his eyes pleading. "Mom," he whispered. "Say something, please. Yell at me. Anything." I didn't yell. My voice, when I finally spoke, was calm. It was so calm it frightened even me. There was no tremor, no anger, just a quiet, unshakable clarity. "You were going to ask me to mortgage the little brick house in Charleston?" "Jonathan," he flinched, as if I had struck him. He couldn't answer. He just stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The truth, spoken so plainly, left no room for excuses. Just then, Lauren returned. She must have left the children with the medic. She stood by the table, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her panic had been replaced by a defensive glare. She looked from me to Jonathan, then back to me. Her eyes were narrowed, suspicious. I turned my attention to her. "You said I was just an obligation for sitting here," I said, my voice remaining perfectly even. "You were half right. I do have an obligation." I paused, letting the words settle. I looked around the beautiful dining room, at the cypress beams overhead, at the wide windows that looked out onto the dark, sleeping marsh. "I have an obligation to this place." Lauren stared at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and scorn. "What are you talking about? This hotel." "I am talking about my home," I said. I saw the moment the ground shifted beneath them. It wasn't a loud crash. It was a silent, seismic tremor. "I built the Heron's Rest with my own 2 hands. After your father passed away," I continued, my gaze steady. "I took Samuel's life insurance money, every penny, and I bought this piece of forgotten marshland. People said I was a fool, a grieving widow who had lost her mind." I leaned forward slightly. "I laid the first foundation stone myself. I chose the wood for these floors. I planted the jasmine that grows by the entrance. I built this place not with money, but with grief and sweat, and a promise I made to your father." Lauren's mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at Jonathan, as if hoping he would deny it, call me a liar, a crazy old woman. But my son's face had turned ashen. He knew, deep down, he knew it was the truth. "I built an entire company," I said, my voice never rising. "Hawthorne Hospitality, 17 properties across 3 states. I sold the corporation years ago." "Jonathan," I was tired. I thought I had earned a quiet life. I thought my son was a good man who could stand on his own 2 feet. I let that last sentence hang in the air. "But I kept this place. The first and the last. I kept it not as an asset. I kept it as a promise, a legacy." I finally turned my full attention back to my son, who was still kneeling on the floor, looking up at me like a stranger. The queen of the sandcastle was gone. In her place was the queen of a castle made of stone and steel and memory. You are kneeling in the middle of my legacy. Jonathan, I said, my voice as hard and clear as glass. And you were going to ask me to trade it all for a lie. A reckoning at dawn. I slept very little that night. Sleep felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Instead, I sat in a chair by the window, watching the moon make a silver path across the ocean. I was no longer grieving. The time for tears was over. Now was the time for clarity, for decisions. Before the sun came up, I sent a short text to my son's phone. Meet me on the beach, where the old pier used to be. Alone. When I walked out onto the sand, the air was cool and damp. The sky was a soft, bruised purple, just beginning to bleed into pink at the horizon. I saw him already standing there, a lonely silhouette against the pale light. He looked small. He looked like the little boy who used to run along this very shore, chasing sandpipers. But he wasn't a little boy anymore. He was a man who had lost his way. He didn't speak as I approached. He just stood there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders slumped. The shame coming off of him was a tangible thing, like the salty mist in the air. I stopped a few feet from him. I didn't reach out to touch him. The time for comforting gestures was past. I have made some decisions. Jonathan, I said. My voice was calm. It was steady. It was the voice of the woman who built this place, not the voice of the mother whose heart he had broken. He flinched, but he nodded. He was ready to hear his sentence. I will not give you a single penny to save your company, I stated. It was not a suggestion. It was a fact. That company was built on lies, on the illusion of success. Things built on a weak foundation are meant to fall. Let it fall. I saw his shoulders sink even lower. He had been hoping. Even after everything, he had been hoping for a bailout. You will sell the house, I continued. My voice even. You will sell the expensive cars. You will sell the watches and the designer bags. You will pay back every person you owe, for as long as it takes. Mom, the children. He started, his voice cracking. The children are my next point. I cut him off, my tone sharp. I will not let my grandchildren be homeless. I will pay the deposit and 6 months' rent on a small, clean apartment. A place you can afford on an honest salary. Not a dime more, and not a day longer than 6 months. I let that sink in. 6 months. A deadline. A countdown. And there are conditions, I said, stepping a little closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. The sun was just starting to break over the horizon, and in the new light, I could see the ruin in his face. First, you will find a job. A real job. I don't care if it's stocking shelves or driving a truck. You will learn what it feels like to earn $1 again, not just move them around. Second, you will see a financial counselor, someone who will teach you how to live within your means. No more pretending. I paused, gathering my strength for the final, most important condition. And third, you and Lauren will go to family counseling. Together. This isn't just about money. Jonathan, your marriage is as bankrupt as your company. And you have lost something far more valuable than your business. You have lost your character. The word hung between us. Character. It was the word his father had valued above all others. He finally broke. A dry, ragged sob escaped his throat. He looked out at the ocean, his face a mask of misery. I gave him a moment, then I finished. This is not a punishment, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. This is a path, a chance to build something real. Your father and I built this place with honesty and hard work. That's the only legacy I have to give you. I turned to walk back toward the lodge. He didn't move. Mom. Wait. He called out, his voice hoarse. Will we ever be a family again? I stopped. But I didn't turn around. I looked at the rising sun, at the promise of a new, difficult day. That's up to you. Jonathan, I said softly, the road back to family isn't paved with money. It has to be rebuilt, stone by stone, with trust. You can start by showing me you know how to lay the first one. Making a decision like that, with your own son, was the hardest thing I have ever had to do. But I believe that real love, true love, sometimes has to be tough. It has to be a firm hand that guides, not a soft one that enables. If you are still listening to my story, if you have walked this far with me, please do me a kindness and comment with the number 5 below. It would mean the world to me to know that I have friends journeying with me through this. Your presence is the greatest encouragement for me to tell the final part of my story. The weight of silence. After that morning on the beach, a new kind of silence fell between us. It wasn't the tense, angry silence of the dinner table. It was a heavy, quiet space filled with the weight of unspoken things. Like a room where a terrible argument has just ended. They left the Herons' Rest that afternoon. I stood on the porch of the main lodge, my hand resting on one of the thick wooden columns Samuel and I had chosen so long ago. I watched their expensive car disappear down the long, oak-lined drive until it was just a speck in the distance, swallowed by the shimmering afternoon heat. I did not cry. I felt strangely empty. Our hollowed out, like a room that has been cleared of all its furniture after a lifetime of occupancy. The weeks that followed were quiet, terribly quiet. I decided to stay at the resort. The small, standard room no longer felt like a place of exile or an insult. It became my sanctuary, a simple space with a bed, a chair, and a window that looked out over the marsh. It was all I needed. Every morning, I woke before the sun, pulled on a simple sweater, and walked down to the beach. The air was cool and damp, thick with the smell of salt and sleeping earth. I'd watch the sky slowly blush from gray to pink to a brilliant, fiery orange. I let the rhythm of the waves, that endless, patient conversation between the water and the shore, wash over the turmoil in my heart. Some things are constant. The waves seemed to say, some things endure. I found myself walking the grounds, not as a guest, but as its keeper. I began to see things I hadn't noticed in years. A patch of garden overrun with weeds, a loose shutter on one of the cottages, peeling paint on a window frame. Instead of making me sad, these small imperfections gave me a sense of purpose. I started having coffee every morning with Mr. Carter in his small, tidy office. We wouldn't talk about Jonathan. We wouldn't talk about the terrible night in the restaurant. We would talk about the resort, about the new roof needed on the west wing before the rainy season, about the young woman at the front desk, Isabella, who showed great promise and deserved a promotion. I found a strange, deep comfort in the simple, solvable problems of running a business. A leaky pipe is an honest problem. You find the leak, you follow it to its source, and you fix it. It doesn't lie to you. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It was a relief to deal with problems that could be solved with a wrench and a little hard work. Instead of the tangled, broken pieces of a family, I started spending my afternoons in the main kitchen, a place filled with the warm, comforting smells of baking bread and simmering stock. I talked with the chefs, men and women whose parents and grandparents had worked the waters and the soil of this coast for generations. I taught our young pastry chef, a girl with flour on her cheeks and a brilliant smile, my late husband's secret recipe for sweet potato pie. The secret, I told her, was a pinch of black pepper to balance the sweet. As I watched her carefully grate the nutmeg, I felt a flicker of genuine joy. I was not just a mother, not just a grandmother. I was Rosemary Hawthorne. I was a teacher, a builder, and I had work to do. I was tending to my roots. About a month after they left, the phone in my room rang late one afternoon. I knew, somehow, that it was him. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up. "Hello," I said. "Mom," he replied. His voice was different. The smooth, confident tone of the successful businessman was gone. It was replaced by a flat, tired sound, stripped of all its polish. "I just wanted to let you know. We sold the house." I closed my eyes. I pictured the house. The porch swing Samuel had hung. The big magnolia tree in the backyard where Jonathan had a tire swing. I said nothing. I just listened. The car, too. Both of them, he continued. "We're moving into a rental apartment next week. It's smaller, in a different part of town." "I see," I said, my own voice quiet and even. There was a long pause on the line. It was filled with the static of everything he wasn't saying. I could hear him breathing on the other end. a shaky, unsteady sound. I imagined him standing in an empty room, the walls bare, where pictures of his perfect life used to hang, surrounded by boxes filled with things that no longer fit. "Okay," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's all. I just thought you should know." And he hung up. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't complain or make excuses. He just stated the facts, like a man reporting on a shipwreck. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. The grandchildren would call me, usually on Sunday afternoon. I could always hear Lauren in the background, prompting them, her voice a low murmur. The calls were always a little awkward, a little strained. Grace would tell me about her new school, how she had to share a bedroom with Lucas now. She didn't complain. She just stated it as a fact. Lucas would tell me about the local soccer team he had joined. They were good kids, brave kids, trying their best to navigate a world that had suddenly shrunk and tilted on its axis. They never asked me about the Heron's Rest, and I never asked them about their parents. We all seemed to understand, without ever saying it, that there was a line we couldn't cross. Not yet. We talked about homework, and books, and whether the sea turtles had come up to nest on the beach yet. We kept our conversations in the safe, shallow waters, but the deep, dark ocean of what had happened was always there, just beneath the surface. There were nights I would lie awake, staring at the dark ceiling, and the strength I felt during the day would crumble. The quiet of the resort would press in on me, and I would feel the full weight of my 73 years. I am a mother. After all, my heart ached for my son. I thought about the crushing weight of his failure, the public humiliation, the private shame he must feel every single day. I thought about my grandchildren, squeezed into a small apartment instead of the grand house with the big backyard they were used to. One evening, after a particularly stilted phone call with Grace, I felt a wave of loneliness so profound it almost drowned me. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Jonathan's name. It would be so easy, so simple. I could call him. I could say the words he was probably desperate to hear. I could tell him it was all a mistake, that it was too much. I could tell him to come home, that I would fix everything, that it would all be okay. The words were right there. A warm, comforting lie on the tip of my tongue, but I didn't press the button. My finger trembled, but I pulled it back, because I knew, with a certainty that was as painful as it was clear, that it wouldn't be okay. It would just be easier, and easier is not always better. Easier is what had led us to this point. My making things easier for him his whole life was a part of the problem. Fixing his problems for him now would not fix what was broken inside of him. It would only teach him that his actions had no real, lasting consequences. It would only prove Lauren right, that I was an obligation, a resource to be used until it ran dry. I set the phone down on the nightstand, and I let myself weep. I cried for the son I had lost, the little boy who believed his mother could fix anything. I cried for the family I thought I had, a family that turned out to be as fragile as a castle made of sand. I cried for the terrible, necessary strength it took to love someone enough to let them fall, and to pray that they find the strength to get back up on their own. The silence that followed my tears was not empty. It was filled with the weight of my choice. It was the heaviest thing I have ever had to carry. The first brick, the 6 months passed. They passed the way time does when you are waiting for something you are not sure will ever come. Each day was a quiet echo of the one before. I walked the beach at dawn. I spoke with Mr. Harder about the hotel's bookings. I ate my meals alone, looking out at the unchanging ocean. The silence from my son's new life was a constant presence. It was a heavy quiet, filled with unspoken questions and the ghosts of what used to be. I held firm to my decision. But there were nights. Oh, there were nights when the loneliness was a physical ache, and I had to grip the arms of my chair to keep from picking up the phone. I kept my promise. The rent for their small apartment was paid on the first of every month. I received no acknowledgement, no thank you, nothing. I told myself it was for the children, and it was. But a part of me, the mother in me, still yearned for a sign. A signal that the path I had set my son upon was leading him somewhere other than further away from me. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, near the end of that 6th month, a small package arrived. It was a simple brown cardboard mailer, addressed to me in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. It was Jonathan's. My heart did a strange little flutter. A mix of hope and fear. I took it out to the porch, overlooking the marsh, and sat in my rocking chair. For a long time, I just held it in my lap, feeling the weight of it. It wasn't heavy, but it felt like it contained the weight of everything. Finally, with trembling fingers, I tore it open. Inside, there was no grand gesture, no expensive gift meant to buy forgiveness. There were only two things: a folded piece of notebook paper and a cashier's check. I looked at the check first. My breath caught in my throat. It was made out to me. Rosemary Hawthorne. The amount was $100. $100. It was such a small, insignificant amount in the grand scheme of things. It was less than a single night's stay at my hotel. It was nothing, and yet, it was everything. Tucked into the memo line of the check, in my son's careful, almost hesitant script, were two words: rent repayment. I put the check down on the small table beside me, my hand shaking slightly. Then, I unfolded the piece of paper. It was a letter. "Mom," it began. "I know this isn't much. I know it's a drop in the ocean compared to what I owe. Not just in money, but in everything else. But it's a start. It's what I could save this month after paying the bills. I have a job. I work for a logistics company, managing warehouse inventory. It's not glamorous. My office is a small, windowless room, and my lunch is usually a sandwich I pack myself. Some days, it's hard. It's humbling in a way that I wasn't prepared for. Last week, the faucet in our kitchen sink started leaking. A steady drip. Drip. Drip that kept Lauren awake at night. My first instinct was to call a plumber, to throw money at the problem like I always did. But we don't have that kind of money anymore. So I went online, watched a few videos, and bought a $15 washer kit. It took me 2 hours, lying on my back on the cold linoleum floor. But I fixed it. I actually fixed it. When I turned the handle and there was no drip, just silence. Lauren looked at me. She really looked at me. I can't remember the last time she looked at me like that. For the first time in years, "Mom, I feel like I am building something real, instead of just trying to maintain an appearance. It's slow. It's painful. But it's mine. This $100, it's the first brick. I know it doesn't fix what I broke, but I hope it shows that I am trying to learn how to build again. I don't dare ask for your forgiveness yet. I know I haven't earned it. I just hope that one day, I will be worthy of it. I love you, Jonathan." I read the letter once, then twice. I traced the shape of his signature with my fingertip. The sharp, confident loops he used to have were gone. This signature was simpler, more careful, more honest. I looked out at the marsh, at the tall grass swaying in the afternoon breeze, and the tears that I had held back for 6 long, lonely months finally came. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of relief. A quiet, cleansing rain. He had fixed a leaky faucet. He had packed his own lunch. He had sent his mother $100. These were the actions of a man, not a boy. The actions of someone laying a foundation, one small, difficult brick at a time. It was not a mansion. It was not a grand estate built on debt and deceit. It was something far more precious. It was the beginning of a home. I sat there on the porch for a long time, holding my son's letter in my hand, until the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The check for $100 sat on the table beside me. It was the most valuable thing I owned. It was the priceless currency of a second chance. It was hope. The unwritten chapter. I held that letter for a long time. The paper was thin and simple, the kind you buy in a block at the drugstore. It was nothing like the thick, embossed stationery Lauren used to use. The $100 check felt heavier in my hand than any amount of money I had ever held. It wasn't an investment. It wasn't a transaction. It was an offering, a small, fragile seed of accountability. That evening, I sat on my porch, the letter resting in my lap. The sun was setting, casting long shadows from the old oak trees. The air was still and warm. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt peaceful. I picked up my phone, and this time, I did not hesitate. I called my son. He answered on the second ring. "Mom," he said, his voice cautious, as if expecting bad news. "Jonathan," I said, and my own voice was warm. I received your letter, and the check. There was a pause. I could hear the faint sounds of children playing in the background. The normal, happy noise of a family at the end of the day. "Oh," he said quietly. "Okay. I'm very proud of your first brick, son." I told him. I heard him take a sharp breath. It was a sound full of 1,000 emotions I couldn't name. When he spoke again, his voice was thick. "Thank you, Mom," he said. That means a lot." It was not a long conversation. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about Lauren or the business or the future. We just talked for a few minutes about the weather, about Grace's soccer game. It was simple. It was normal. And it was more real than any conversation we had had in the last 10 years. Before we hung up, he said, "I love you, Mom." And I said, "I love you too, Jonathan." And I knew that for the first time in a very long time. We were both telling the truth. That was a few months ago. Things are not perfect. A lifetime of broken trust cannot be rebuilt in a season. The story of my family is not one of those neat and tidy tales that ends with everyone hugging and all problems solved. Our story is more complicated, more real. But what I have learned in my 73 years is that the most important lessons are rarely simple. I used to think my greatest achievement was building a hotel empire from nothing, but I was wrong. My greatest achievement has been learning to navigate the ruins of my own heart and finding the strength to let a new foundation be laid, one brick at a time. This journey has taught me things I thought I already knew. I have learned a hard lesson as a parent. I learned that the greatest act of love is not always to shelter your children from every storm. Sometimes it is to have the faith that you raise them with enough strength to rebuild their own house after the storm has passed. Our true legacy is not what we give them, but what we teach them to build for themselves. A foundation of character is worth more than a kingdom of wealth. I have also seen a lesson in my son's story, a lesson for all our children. Jonathan's story reminds us that it is never too late to put down the heavy burden of pretending. It is never too late to pick up the simple, honest tools of truth. Redemption doesn't begin with a grand gesture or a dramatic apology. It begins with the small, quiet, daily acts of accountability. It begins with the first brick. And finally, I think this story holds a lesson for the world we live in now. We are all so busy building castles. Castles on the sand of social media. Castles built from the flimsy materials of status and instant wealth. We decorate them with shiny things and filtered pictures, hoping no one sees the cracks in the walls. But my family's story is a reminder. The strongest foundations are not built with money or fame. They are built with integrity. They are built with truth. And sometimes, it takes the clear, unwavering voice of a child to blow away all the sand and lies, just so we can see the solid rock underneath, waiting for us to begin again. My son still sends me a check every month. It's never a lot. Sometimes it's for $50. Sometimes a little more. It doesn't matter. I don't cash them. I keep them in a small wooden box on my dresser. They are not payment. They are proof. They are the bricks of a new house, a new relationship, being built slowly, carefully. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if Lauren will ever truly understand. I don't know if our family will ever be whole in the way it once was. But I am no longer afraid of the silence. The story of my family is not over. It has simply started a new chapter, an unwritten chapter. And this time, I have faith that we will write it together. Every story has an ending, but for the people living them, it's just a pause before the next chapter. For Rosemary and Jonathan, this is that pause. The air is still, filled with the scent of hope and the rust of old wounds. What happens when the 7th month arrives? Does Lauren find her own way to lay a brick? Does Grace's innocent love become the bridge that truly connects them all? Those are stories for another day. But Rosemary's choice? That's the story for today. A choice between enabling and empowering. What would your choice have been? I genuinely want to know. Leave your thoughts below, and let's talk. If you enjoy stories that don't just end, but leave you wondering, then you've found a home here at Deepucator Stories. Liking, sharing, and subscribing lets me know you're ready for the next chapter. Until then, remember this: the most important character in any story is the one who learns how to change.